You can't stay here. The words sliced through the silence just as the choir finished its final hymn. Every head inside the cathedral turned. Standing near the last row, dressed in a simple black dress with no jewelry except a silver cross around her neck, was a black woman who looked as though she wanted to disappear rather than be noticed. She lowered her eyes politely. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm only here to pay my respects." One of the security guards stepped closer. "This service is private." Another guest whispered loud enough for nearby people to hear. "Who invited her?" "I've never seen her before." "Probably another reporter trying to sneak in." "No, she doesn't look like a reporter." The whispers spread through the enormous hall faster than smoke. At the front of the cathedral rested a polished walnut casket surrounded by thousands of white lilies. Inside lay Chairman Jeong Gun-woo, founder of Jeong Global, the man newspapers called Korea's Iron Chairman. For more than 4 decades, he had built one of Asia's most powerful business empires from almost nothing. Prime ministers had sought his advice. Presidents attended his charity galas. Competitors feared his name. Today, even his enemies had come to honor him. Yet the attention of nearly every guest had shifted from the casket to the quiet woman standing alone in the back. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply held an old leather notebook tightly against her chest, as though it mattered more than anything else she owned. No one noticed her trembling fingers. No one wondered why her eyes had already been red long before she entered the cathedral. To everyone else, she was simply someone who didn't belong. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments. It's always amazing to see how stories like this bring people together from all over the world. "Escort her outside," one security guard said. Before he could move another step, a calm voice interrupted. "What's happening?" The crowd parted almost instantly. Jeong Gun-woo, the eldest son, vice chairman of Jeong Global, the man everyone expected to succeed his father. His black suit was immaculate. His expression was even colder. One of the guards bowed. "Sir, this woman entered without an invitation." Junio looked Tanesha up and down for barely 2 seconds. "Your name?" "Tanesha." Silence. No reaction. The name meant nothing to anyone present. "How did you know my father?" Tanesha hesitated. I knew him a long time ago." Several executives exchanged amused glances. "A long time ago?" one of them muttered. "Convenient." Another guest chuckled. "They always appear after someone wealthy dies." Junesio's patience disappeared. "My father knew thousands of people." "I'm sure he did. If you're hoping to speak with our attorneys regarding his estate." Tanesha gently shook her head. "I'm not here for money." Someone behind her laughed. "They all say that." The laughter spread. Not loud. Not cruel enough to make headlines. Just enough to remind one woman that she stood completely alone. Tanesha never looked toward them. Instead, she looked at the photograph resting beside the casket. Chairman Jeong wasn't smiling in the official portrait. He rarely smiled in public. But she remembered another smile. One from 22 years ago. A tired man lying in a hospital bed. A man whose life had almost ended before it truly changed. She quietly whispered words no one else heard. "I kept my promise." Junesio frowned. "What did you say?" She looked back at him. "Nothing." His younger sister, Jong Harin, stepped beside him. Unlike her brother, her grief had already been replaced by irritation. "We've already had people pretending to be father's friends since this morning." She folded her arms. "If you have flowers, leave them and go." Tanesha glanced toward the bouquet in her hands. Simple white daisies. Nothing extravagant. Chairman Jeong had once told her they reminded him that beautiful things didn't need attention to matter. She slowly walked toward the casket. Immediately, 2 security guards blocked her path. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You can't approach." For the first time, pain appeared across Tanesha's face. Not anger. Not embarrassment. But she carefully placed the flowers on the floor instead. Then, her voice almost broke. "Please place them beside him after everyone leaves." One guard reached for the bouquet. Before he could take it, Arin stopped him. "No." The room fell silent again. If father didn't know her. She looked directly at Tanesha. "Those flowers don't belong near him." Gasps echoed throughout the cathedral. Even a few executives looked uncomfortable. Tanesha stared at the daisies lying between them. For several seconds, she said absolutely nothing. Then she bent down, picked them back up, smoothed one bent petal with her thumb, and quietly whispered, "I understand." She turned toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed through the cathedral. No one followed. No one apologized. No one asked why. Tears streamed silently down her face. Outside, rain had just begun to fall. She stopped beneath the stone steps and looked once more at the towering cathedral. Then she reached inside her handbag. She removed an old envelope. Its edges were worn. Its paper yellow with age. Across the front, written in Chairman Jeong's unmistakable handwriting, were just 7 words. Open only after my funeral has ended. Tanesha closed her eyes. She had carried that envelope for 22 years. She had kept every promise inside it. But she had no idea that within the next hour, the contents of another envelope waiting inside the cathedral would leave Korea's most powerful family speechless, and make the woman they had just humiliated the single most important person in the entire room. Rain tapped softly against the cathedral's stained glass windows as the final guests returned to their seats. Outside, Tanesha remained beneath the stone archway, clutching the old envelope to her chest. She had no intention of going back inside. The funeral was over. Her promise had been fulfilled. Or so she believed. Inside the cathedral, attorney Han Ji-wook quietly approached the podium carrying a thick leather folder sealed with Chairman Jeong's personal crest. Conversations immediately faded. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Not the funeral. The will. Executives straightened in their seats. Board members exchanged subtle glances. Financial journalists waiting outside prepared breaking news alerts before a single word had even been spoken. Across the front row, Jong Juniseo sat with complete confidence. For years, investors had assumed he would become the next chairman. His father had trained him, introduced him to world leaders, allowed him to negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions. There was no reason to believe today would be any different. Beside him, his younger sister, Harin, discreetly checked her phone beneath the armrest. Her private banking app showed 3 overdue loan notifications. She quickly locked the screen before anyone noticed. She wasn't grieving the loss of her father nearly as much as she feared losing the lifestyle his name had financed. Attorney Han adjusted his glasses. His voice carried effortlessly through the silent cathedral. Chairman Jeong Gun-woo revised his final will 11 days before his passing. A ripple moved through the room. 11 days? None of the children knew about another revision. Attorney Han continued. He instructed that this document be read exactly as written. He broke the wax seal, opened the folder, looked toward the front row, then began reading. To my children. His voice echoed across the cathedral. If what you hear today surprises you, then I have already failed as your father. The sentence landed like a stone. Juniseo frowned. Harin slowly lowered her phone. Attorney Han continued. 4 years you believed Jeong Global existed to secure your future. Another pause. You were wrong. Several executives shifted uneasily. One coughed. Nobody dared interrupt. I did not spend 46 years building this company to create wealthy heirs. Another pause. I built it to create honorable people. Silence. No applause. No movement. Only the sound of rain striking the cathedral roof. Juniseo's jaw tightened. His father had never spoken emotionally. Not even in private. Something felt different. Attorney Han turned another page. My personal assets shall be divided according to the attached schedule. That was expected. Properties, investments, art collections, international holdings. Nothing unusual. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The controlling voting trust of Jeong Global. Every executive leaned forward. Shall not pass to any member of my family. A collective gasp swept through the cathedral. Juniseo stood abruptly. What? Attorney Han never looked up. He simply continued reading. The controlling voting trust shall be entrusted to. Another pause. Long enough for every heartbeat in the room to become audible. Miss Tanesha. For a moment, no one reacted. It was as though the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Then confusion erupted. Who? Tanesha. That woman? The one security escorted outside? This has to be a mistake. It can't be. Juniseo stepped toward the podium. There is no Tanesha connected to our family. Attorney Han calmly removed another sealed envelope. There is. He looked directly at Juniseo. And your father anticipated this exact reaction. The lawyer handed the envelope to him. Across the front, written in Chairman Jeong's unmistakable handwriting, were the words. For Juniseo. Read only after you lose your temper. Several people exchanged bewildered looks. Even Juniseo hesitated. Slowly he opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page. He began reading silently. As he read, the color slowly drained from his face. His confident posture disappeared. His hands trembled. Harin reached for the letter. What did father say? He couldn't answer. Attorney Han spoke instead. Chairman Jeong anticipated attempts to challenge this decision. He opened another document. The voting trust is legally irreversible. Someone from the board stood. Surely she inherits the company? Attorney Han shook his head. No. The room grew quiet again. Miss Brooks inherits neither ownership nor personal wealth. Confused whispers spread across the pews. Attorney Han explained. She receives 51% voting authority. He paused to let the words sink in. She cannot sell the company. She cannot transfer its assets. She cannot enrich herself. Her sole responsibility is to determine who is worthy of leading Jeong Global. Every board member stared in disbelief. If none of the chairman's children demonstrate the integrity required. Attorney Han looked directly toward the family. She has the legal authority to appoint someone else. The words exploded through the cathedral like thunder. One executive nearly dropped his glasses. Another whispered, "This is impossible." Across the room, several shareholders immediately began making frantic phone calls. Stock analysts outside the cathedral received leaked messages. Within minutes, financial news channels across Korea flashed breaking headlines. Jeong Global succession thrown into chaos. Inside the cathedral, Jeong Harin shook her head repeatedly. No. This woman manipulated him. She planned this. She must have. Attorney Han calmly pressed a small remote. I was instructed to play one final message. A large screen descended behind the altar. Chairman Jeong appeared on the screen. He looked older than anyone remembered. Thinner. More tired. Yet his eyes remained sharp. He looked directly into the camera. Then he smiled. It was the first genuine smile many of his employees had ever seen. My children. His voice filled the cathedral. If you're watching this. Then I've finally gone where board meetings can no longer find me. A few nervous laughs escaped the audience. Then his expression became serious. You believe I trusted a stranger over my own family? He shook his head. No. I trusted the person who spent 22 years proving that kindness doesn't disappear when no one is watching. Juneo slowly lowered his eyes. Chairman Jeong continued. You judged Tanesha after seeing her for less than 1 minute. He paused. I judged her over 22 years. Another pause. And every single year. She chose people over power. The entire cathedral fell into complete silence. Outside, Tanesha had already reached the bottom of the cathedral steps. She had no idea that, inside the building she had just left in tears, her name had become the most important name in the history of Jeong Global. Outside the cathedral, Tanesha had just reached the front gate when she heard someone calling her name. Miss Brooks. She stopped but didn't turn around immediately. For a brief moment she thought she had imagined it. No one had called her by name in years except the children at the community center where she worked. Miss Brooks. This time the voice was closer. She turned. Attorney Han Ji-wook was hurrying toward her, his polished shoes splashing through the rain. Behind him, Chairman Jeong's longtime chauffeur, Mr. Lee, held an umbrella over both of them. Attorney Han finally caught his breath. You can't leave. Tanesha offered a tired smile. I've already caused enough trouble. No. Attorney Han shook his head. You haven't even begun to. He held out a cream-colored envelope sealed with the Jeong family crest. The chairman instructed me to give this to you only after the will had been read. Tanesha stared at it without moving. Her fingers trembled. I don't understand. I believe, Attorney Han replied quietly, that's exactly how Chairman Jeong expected you to feel. She slowly accepted the envelope. The paper felt strangely familiar. Almost identical to the one she had carried for 22 years. For several long seconds she simply looked at it. Then she broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. The ink had faded slightly, but every word carried Chairman Jeong's unmistakable handwriting. Dear Tanesha. If you're reading this, then my children have probably embarrassed themselves. Despite everything, Tanesha laughed softly through her tears. It sounded exactly like something he would write. I asked you once to trust me. Today, I must ask you to trust me one final time. Please don't walk away. They will believe I rewarded you. They are wrong. I gave you a burden, not a gift. Tanesha swallowed hard. Rain blurred the ink as tears rolled down her cheeks. You once told me that leadership is measured by the lives we improve, not the titles we collect. You probably don't even remember saying those words. I never forgot them. She closed her eyes. She remembered. 22 years earlier. A hospital room in Seattle. A stubborn patient refusing to rest. A young nursing student trying to convince him that billionaires healed no faster than ordinary people. She had laughed when he insisted he had important meetings. She had told him, people can replace a chairman, but nobody can replace a father. He had stared at her for nearly a minute before answering, no one has spoken to me like that in 30 years. She hadn't even known his name. Back inside the cathedral, the atmosphere had become unbearable. Juneo slammed both hands onto the conference table where the board had gathered after the funeral. This is insanity. One executive avoided eye contact. Another quietly closed his laptop. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Director Lee cleared his throat. Legally? He hesitated. The chairman's instructions are valid. Juneo glared at him. So you're telling me? My father's 46-year empire is now controlled by someone who isn't even Korean? The room fell silent. No one answered. Not because they agreed. Because they knew the question wasn't really about nationality. It was about pride. Attorney Han looked directly at him. Your father didn't choose her because of where she came from. He chose her because of who she became. Juneo laughed bitterly. You expect me to believe some charity worker is qualified to oversee Jeong Global? Before Attorney Han could answer, another voice spoke. I do. Everyone turned. Mr. Lee had entered quietly. For 34 years, he had driven Chairman Jeong to board meetings, government offices, factories, hospitals, and family vacations. Most executives barely noticed him. Today they listened. Mr. Lee bowed respectfully. I watched Chairman Jeong more closely than anyone. He trusted thousands of employees, hundreds of executives, dozens of politicians. He paused. But he admired only one person. Juneo folded his arms. A stranger? Mr. Lee looked him directly in the eyes. No. The woman who reminded him of the man he wished he'd been sooner. Silence. Mr. Lee continued. Your father often said, success made me powerful. Tanesha taught me how to become useful. Those words landed harder than any legal document. Several board members slowly lowered their heads. For the first time they realized this wasn't a random decision. It had been 22 years in the making. Outside, Tanesha reached the final page of Chairman Jeong's letter. You once saved my life. But that isn't why I chose you. You spent the next 22 years saving people who could never repay you. That is why. If my children hate you, be patient. If they insult you, remain kind. If they threaten you, stand firm. Do not judge them too quickly. The greatest mistake I ever made as a father was confusing achievement with character. Give them the chance I failed to give them. Your friend, Jeong Gun-woo. Tanesha folded the letter carefully. She couldn't speak. Mr. Lee stepped closer. The chairman left one final instruction. She looked up. What instruction? He asked me to bring you back. Tanesha stared at the cathedral. I don't belong in there. Mr. Lee smiled gently. Neither did he. The first day he started his company. She couldn't help smiling. It sounded exactly like something Chairman Jeong would have said. Attorney Han extended his hand. The board is waiting. Tanesha looked once more at the weathered envelope she had carried for 22 years. Then she looked at the towering cathedral where only minutes earlier she had been treated like an unwanted guest. She took a slow breath. Not because she wanted power. Not because she wanted revenge. But because she had made one final promise to a dying friend. And Tanesha had never broken a promise. As she walked back toward the cathedral doors, none of them realized another storm was already waiting inside. Because the chairman hadn't left behind just a will. He had left behind a test. And before this day was over, every member of the Jeong family would be forced to reveal exactly who they were when money was no longer the most valuable thing in the room. The cathedral doors opened once again. This time, every conversation stopped. Tanesha stepped inside. The same people who had ignored her less than 20 minutes earlier now watched her as though she carried the future in her hands. No one whispered. No one laughed. The silence was heavier than before. Attorney Han guided her toward the front of the room. This seat has been prepared for you. It was Chairman Jeong's chair. The chair at the head of the long conference table where Jeong Global's most important decisions had been made for decades. Tanesha looked at it, then gently shook her head. I can't sit there. Attorney Han frowned. The chairman specifically requested. I know. She smiled kindly. But I haven't earned that seat. Instead, she chose a simple chair halfway down the table. The gesture caught everyone off guard. She had been handed the most powerful position in the room, and immediately refused its symbol. Even Juniseo noticed. He said nothing. But for the first time his certainty began to crack. Attorney Han placed another leather folder on the table. There is one final document. Every head turned. There are conditions. Juniseo leaned forward. What conditions? Attorney Han opened the folder. Chairman Jeong did not believe leadership could be inherited. He believed it had to be proven. Tanesha looked up. She hadn't known this either. Attorney Han continued. For the next 6 months, Miss Brooks will serve as guardian of the voting trust. At the end of that period, she will appoint the next chairman. The room remained quiet. Then came the sentence that changed everything. However, none of the chairman's children are guaranteed consideration. Harin shot to her feet. What? If the guardian concludes that none of the family members possess the integrity required to lead Jeong Global, she may appoint any qualified individual. The board members looked at one another in disbelief. One elderly director slowly removed his glasses. In 50 years, I've never heard of anything like this. Attorney Han nodded. Neither had I. Juniseo folded his arms. So this is some kind of competition? Attorney Han looked directly at him. No. It's a mirror. The words lingered in the room. Juniseo frowned. A mirror? Attorney Han lifted another envelope. Chairman Jeong anticipated that question. He unfolded a handwritten page. This is to be read only after my children ask whether they are being tested. Several executives exchanged nervous smiles. The chairman had predicted almost everything. Attorney Han began reading. My children, you believe Tanesha is here to judge you. She isn't. Life already has. He turned the page. The next 6 months will simply reveal the judgment you've already earned through your choices. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. Character is not built during a test. It is revealed by one. Tanesha slowly lowered her eyes. She suddenly understood why Chairman Jeong had called this a burden. This wasn't about choosing a CEO. It was about deciding the future of an empire, without becoming the villain in someone else's story. Harin broke the silence. This is ridiculous. She looked directly at Tanesha. You don't know anything about our company. Tanesha answered calmly. You're right. Harin looked almost victorious. Until Tanesha continued. But I know a great deal about people. The room became quiet again. I've spent the last 15 years working with children who lost parents. I've helped families rebuild after disasters. I've watched people make impossible choices. She looked around the table. I've learned something. No resume can tell you whether someone deserves to lead. The words weren't spoken with arrogance. Only quiet conviction. One of the senior board members raised his hand. Miss Brooks. She looked toward him. If I may ask, why did you come today? I mean, after everything that happened. Tanesha smiled sadly. Because I promised him I would. The director nodded. And after the way you were treated? She glanced briefly toward Juniseo and Harin. I almost left. The confession surprised everyone. I stood outside for several minutes. I told myself, I've done my part. She smiled softly. But then I remembered something your father once told me. Everyone listened. He said, integrity isn't doing the right thing when people appreciate you. It's doing the right thing when they misunderstand you. No one spoke. Even the directors who had worked beside Chairman Jeong for decades admitted silently. They had never heard those words before. Suddenly the conference room doors burst open. A young assistant rushed inside, breathing hard. Vice Chairman. Everyone turned. What is it? The media. What about them? They've discovered Miss Brooks' identity. Attorney Han frowned. Already? The assistant nodded. They're broadcasting live. He swallowed. And what? They're saying the chairman left Jeong Global too? He hesitated. An unknown American woman. The room erupted. Phones began vibrating across the table. Breaking news alerts flooded every executive's screen. Who is Tanesha? Foreign woman takes control of Korea's business giant. Family feud explodes after billionaire's will. Reporters had already gathered outside the cathedral gates. Camera crews multiplied by the minute. Helicopters circled overhead. The story was becoming international news. Juniseo walked to the window. Hundreds of journalists were pushing against police barricades. Flashes exploded like lightning. He turned slowly toward Tanesha. This. He pointed toward the crowd. is your fault. The accusation hung in the air. Tanesha didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the same window. She looked at the reporters, then quietly said, "No. They're here because your father made a decision." She turned back toward him. "What happens next depends on the decisions we make." Their eyes met for the first time without anger, without interruption, without status. For a brief second, neither saw an enemy, only another grieving human being trying to understand the last wishes of the man they had both loved, in very different ways. But before either of them could speak again, Attorney Han reached for the final sealed box resting beside Chairman Jeong's chair. His expression changed. He looked at Tanesha, then at the family. The chairman left one last instruction. He rested his hand on the box. "And I believe this is the one that will change everything." No one moved. The small wooden box resting beside Chairman Jeong's chair suddenly seemed more valuable than every building Jeong Global owned. It wasn't ornate. No gold trim. No expensive carvings. Just dark walnut wood, polished smooth by time. On the lid, a small brass plate bore a single inscription. Character. Attorney Han looked around the room. The chairman instructed that this box be opened only after Miss Brooks returned. Tanesha's heart tightened. "I didn't know about any of this." "I know," Attorney Han replied. He wanted it that way. He carefully unlocked the box. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes. One old photograph, a small brass key, and a simple fountain pen. Nothing else. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Juniseo frowned. "That's it." Attorney Han nodded. "Apparently, that's all your father believed he needed." He picked up the photograph first. It showed a much younger Chairman Jeong sitting in a hospital bed. His right arm was heavily bandaged. Beside him stood a young black nursing student in blue scrubs, laughing as she pointed a finger at him. She couldn't have been older than 20. Tanesha smiled through fresh tears. "I remember that day." Arin stared at the picture. "That's you?" Tanesha nodded. He refused to stay in bed. A few surprised smiles appeared around the table. Attorney Han turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 6 words. "The day my second life began." Silence. No one had ever heard Chairman Jeong describe any moment that way. Attorney Han opened the first envelope. Its title read, "For the Board of Directors." He began reading. "Many of you believed I built Jeong Global through intelligence." He smiled sadly. "You are mistaken." Another pause. "I built it because one stranger reminded me that success without compassion is simply another form of failure." Several directors lowered their eyes. Attorney Han continued. "Today you may wonder why I entrusted my legacy to someone outside our family." He looked around the room. "The better question is..." He paused. "Why did none of my own children convince me they deserved it?" The words landed like thunder. No one dared speak. Attorney Han reached for the second envelope. It was addressed to Tanesha. She opened it herself. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature. Just 7 names. 7 former Jeong Global executives. Each name had a check mark beside it. Tanesha looked confused. "What does this mean?" Attorney Han answered quietly. "They were all dismissed over the last 15 years. For corruption. For fraud. For exploiting workers." Tanesha looked up. "I don't understand." Mr. Lee spoke. "The chairman gave every one of them a second chance. They all failed." Tanesha slowly looked back at the paper. At the bottom was another sentence. "People rarely change because they are punished. They change because someone finally expects better from them." Then Attorney Han lifted the final envelope. The room instantly became tense again. Across the front was written, "To my children." He unfolded the pages. There were several. His voice grew quieter. "If you are hearing this, then you are probably wondering which of you I loved most." Juniseo looked down. Harin quietly wiped away a tear. Attorney Han continued. "The answer is simple. All of you. Equally." The room relaxed. Until he read the next sentence. "But love and trust are not the same thing." Every eye lifted again. "Love is given. Trust is earned." Junio slowly closed his eyes. He knew exactly where this was going. Chairman Jeong's letter continued. "Juniseo, you became brilliant. But somewhere along the way, you began measuring people by usefulness instead of humanity." Juniseo's breathing slowed. Every word felt painfully accurate. Attorney Han turned another page. "Harin, you built charities that photograph generosity. Instead of practicing it, Harin covered her mouth. Her tears finally came. Not because she'd been insulted, because deep inside, she knew it was true. Then came the final paragraph. Neither of you failed because you lacked talent. You failed because you stopped listening. The company doesn't need another genius. It needs someone people can trust. The room was silent. Not uncomfortable. Broken. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Everyone turned. A young employee rushed inside. Attorney Han. What happened? The archives. What about them? They've been broken into. Every executive stood. What? The security office just called. They caught someone attempting to remove confidential files. Juniseo frowned. Who? The employee hesitated, then answered quietly. Director Kim. Gasps spread across the room. Director Kim had served Jeong Global for nearly 20 years. He had always appeared loyal. Mr. Lee immediately understood. The succession files. Attorney Han nodded. He was trying to destroy evidence. Within minutes, security officers escorted Director Kim into the conference room. His tie was crooked. His face was pale. Attorney Han looked at him calmly. Why? Director Kim remained silent. Until Juniseo spoke. You owe us an explanation. Director Kim laughed bitterly. Explanation? You think this started today? The room froze. He looked directly at Juniseo. Your father was preparing to remove me months ago. Attorney Han narrowed his eyes. You knew? Director Kim nodded. I found copies of his private evaluations. He pointed toward Tanesha. When I heard about her, I knew everything was over. So you tried to destroy the records? I tried to save myself. Attorney Han shook his head. No. You proved the chairman right. Security escorted Director Kim away. As the doors closed behind him, no one spoke. The betrayal had shaken everyone. Even those who disliked Chairman Jeong suddenly understood something. His greatest fear had never been losing money. It had been leaving his company in the hands of people who valued power more than principles. Tanesha quietly stood. I've made my decision. Every head turned. Juniseo's heart skipped. So soon. Tanesha nodded gently. My first decision. She looked toward Attorney Han. Director Kim's family? They're innocent. Attorney Han looked surprised. I don't want them punished for his choices. Juniseo stared at her. After everything she had endured, her first act of authority wasn't revenge. It was mercy. For the first time since the funeral began, he saw the woman his father had trusted. And for the first time in years, Juniseo felt ashamed. He finally understood. His father had never been trying to build a successful company. He had been trying to build good people. 6 months later, the headquarters of Jeong Global looked exactly the same from the outside. The glass tower still reflected the Seoul skyline. Employees still hurried through the revolving doors. Investors still watched every movement of the company's stock. But inside, everything had changed. For the first time in decades, executives no longer feared entering the chairman's office. Department heads now spent one day every month working alongside frontline employees. The executive dining room had been replaced with a shared cafeteria. Anonymous employee complaints were answered within 48 hours. Scholarship programs had doubled. Factory safety inspections had become mandatory. And every board meeting now began with the same question Chairman Jeong had written in his final notebook. Who became better because of our decisions this week? No one had expected the company to become more profitable. Yet it had. Not because Tanesha had made brilliant business decisions. Because she had changed the culture. People stopped working out of fear. They started working with purpose. On the top floor, the board of directors gathered for one final meeting. This was the day. The guardian of the voting trust would announce the next chairman of Jeong Global. Television crews lined the streets outside. Shareholders from around the world watched the live broadcast. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. Juniseo looked different. He no longer wore expensive cufflinks. His assistant had quietly mentioned weeks earlier that he had sold his luxury penthouse and moved into a modest apartment closer to the company's oldest manufacturing plant. No press release had announced it. No cameras had captured it. He simply stopped living like a man who believed titles made him important. Instead, every Wednesday morning, employees found him eating breakfast in the staff cafeteria, learning names, listening, apologizing. Not because Tanesha demanded it, because for the first time in his life, he understood his father's disappointment. Across the table, Harin looked different as well. She had resigned from 3 celebrity charity boards, closed the foundation's lavish headquarters, sold most of its luxury vehicles. She now spent her weekends personally visiting children's hospitals funded by the Jeong Foundation. Not for photographs. Not for publicity. Most people never even knew she was there. Chairman Jeong's words had broken something inside her, then quietly rebuilt it. Attorney Han stood. Miss Brooks. The board is ready. Tanesha rose slowly. She looked exactly as she had 6 months earlier. Simple black suit. Silver cross. No expensive jewelry. No designer handbag. The only thing she carried was Chairman Jeong's old leather notebook. She placed it gently on the table. I've spent 6 months asking myself one question. She looked around the room. Not who deserves this company, but what this company deserves. The room fell silent. She continued. When Chairman Jeong entrusted me with this responsibility, I thought he was asking me to choose a leader. She smiled softly. I was wrong. He was asking me to discover whether leaders already existed. She looked toward Junisseo. When we first met, you measured me by my appearance. Junio lowered his head. You believed power gave you value. He nodded quietly. I did. She turned toward Harin. And you believed generosity only mattered if someone was watching. Tears filled Harin's eyes. I know. Tanesha smiled gently. But neither of you is the same person I met 6 months ago. She opened Chairman Jeong's notebook. Inside was the final handwritten page. One sentence. Written only days before his death. She read it aloud. The greatest return on investment is a transformed heart. No one spoke. Several executives quietly wiped away tears. Tanesha closed the notebook. My decision is final. The room seemed to stop breathing. She looked directly at Junisseo. Please stand. He did. Slowly. His hands trembled. Not from fear. From humility. Tanesha stepped toward him. There was a time. I would never have trusted you with this company. Junisseo nodded. I wouldn't have trusted myself either. A faint smile appeared on Tanesha's face. That's exactly why. She turned toward the board. Today, I appoint Jeong Junisseo as the next chairman of Jeong Global. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted into applause. Not because a billionaire's son had inherited his father's empire, but because he had finally earned it. Junisseo walked toward Tanesha. His eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve this. She answered quietly. No, you didn't. A gentle smile crossed her face. But you've spent 6 months becoming someone who does. He couldn't speak. Instead, he did something no one expected. Before the entire board, before the international media, before the executives who had once feared him, he bowed deeply. Not the polite bow of business. The deep, respectful bow reserved for someone who has changed your life. I spent years trying to become my father's successor. His voice shook. I never realized. I first needed to become the kind of man he hoped I would be. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Attorney Han removed his glasses. Mr. Lee quietly looked toward Chairman Jeong's empty chair, then smiled. As always, Chairman. You were thinking 20 years ahead. Later that afternoon, Tanesha stood alone outside the headquarters. A young reporter approached cautiously. Miss Brooks. She smiled politely. Yes. You could have kept control forever. You could have become one of the most powerful women in Asia. Why didn't you? Tanesha looked toward the sky for a moment before answering. Because Chairman Jeong never trusted me with power. The reporter looked confused. He trusted me? To know when to let it go. She handed the reporter a single document. What is this? The chairman's final request. The reporter opened it. It announced the creation of the Jeong Gun-woo Legacy Foundation, funded with billions of dollars dedicated to children's education, emergency healthcare, and scholarships across Asia, Africa, and underserved communities around the world. At the bottom of the page was a single handwritten sentence from Chairman Jeong. If one act of kindness could save a billionaire, imagine what millions of acts of kindness could save. That evening, long after the cameras had disappeared, Tanesha visited Chairman Jeong's grave. She placed fresh white daisies beside the headstone. This time, no one stopped her. She smiled. You worried too much. The breeze gently moved through the trees. They turned out better than you thought. She stood quietly for another moment, then looked toward the setting sun. I kept my promise. And somehow, she felt as though her old friend had kept his too. Call to action. What did this story teach you about legacy? Do you believe wealth should be inherited simply because of blood, or should true leadership be earned through character and integrity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more unforgettable stories that remind us that kindness, integrity, and compassion are the greatest legacies anyone can leave behind.